There is a reason some people seem to build wealth no matter where they start in life, while others work hard for decades and still struggle financially. And the difference is rarely intelligence, it is rarely luck. More often, it comes down to how they think about money, discipline, and opportunity. Across centuries, certain communities developed powerful ways of thinking about wealth, business, and success. Not secrets, not shortcuts, but principles. Principles that shaped generations of entrepreneurs, investors, and leaders. In this video, we're going to explore those principles, because once you understand them, you may start seeing money, opportunity, and success in a completely different way. Timeless Business Lessons from Jewish Wisdom. Chapter 1. The Day You Realize Hard Work Isn't Enough. There is a moment that happens quietly in many people's lives. It doesn't arrive with fireworks. It doesn't come with a dramatic announcement. It usually comes on an ordinary day, maybe while you're sitting in traffic after work, maybe while you are looking at your bank account on your phone, or maybe while watching someone else's life suddenly move forward faster than yours. And a question appears in your mind, a simple question, but one that can change everything. Why do some people seem to move ahead, while others work just as hard and stay in the same place? Think about it. You wake up early, you work long hours, you meet deadlines, you answer emails, you attend meetings, you do everything that responsible people are supposed to do, and yet somehow, at the end of the month, your money disappears faster than it arrived. You stretch one paycheck until Friday. You delay plans. You postpone dreams. Meanwhile, someone else seems to be building wealth at a completely different speed, not necessarily smarter, not necessarily more educated, not even working harder, just different results. One afternoon not long ago, I met an old friend for coffee. We hadn't seen each other in years. Back in school, he wasn't exactly the kind of student teachers expected to succeed. He struggled with math. He was often late. More than once, he borrowed my notes just to pass a class. Nothing about his past suggested he would become a successful entrepreneur. And yet, when he walked into that cafe, something about him had changed. Not just his clothes, not just his confidence. It was something deeper, a quiet certainty. The kind of calm energy you often see in people who have figured something out. During our conversation, I learned that he now owned a small chain of online businesses, nothing flashy, nothing that appeared on magazine covers, but together they generated more income in a month than many professionals earn in a year. He worked from home, ran every morning, played golf on weekends, and most importantly, he no longer worried about money the way most people do. At one point, I finally asked him the question that had been sitting in my mind. I leaned forward and said, "How does everything you touch seem to turn into money?" He laughed, not the arrogant kind of laugh, more like someone remembering a lesson that changed their life. Then he said something I didn't expect. "I'm not smarter than you. I just learned to think differently about money." I asked him what he meant. He paused for a moment. Then he said something that stayed with me long after that conversation ended. Most people are taught how to work. Very few people are taught how to think about value. And some of the best lessons about value come from traditions that have studied money and trade for centuries. Then he mentioned something fascinating. Throughout history, many scholars have studied the cultural traditions of Jewish communities when it comes to education, business, negotiation, and finance. Not because of stereotypes, but because of a long cultural emphasis on questioning ideas, valuing education, thinking, long-term understanding trade, and building strong networks. These traditions produced countless lessons about money, responsibility, and opportunity. Lessons that anyone can learn. You don't have to be born into any particular culture. You simply need to be willing to examine how you think. And that is what this story is about. Not secrets, not shortcuts, not get-rich-quick tricks, but ways of thinking that change the way people see money, risk, and opportunity. Over centuries, countless proverbs, stories, and teachings have been passed down in Jewish communities about business and life. Some are simple. Some are humorous. Some are surprisingly sharp, but many of them share a common theme. Success rarely begins with money. It begins with belief. Lesson 1. Success begins with the story you tell yourself. One of the most overlooked forces in business isn't capital. It isn't connections. It isn't even knowledge. It is belief. Not the vague kind of belief people post on motivational posters, but a specific internal belief about what is possible. There is an old story often told in different forms. A traveler once asked a Jewish merchant why people in his community often seemed confident about business. The merchant smiled and told him a joke. "Because we eat fish heads." The traveler looked confused. Fish heads? So he bought one from the merchant for a high price. Later he realized the entire fish would have cost less. He became angry. "You tricked me," the merchant calmly replied. "Look at that. The fish head is already working." The humor of the story hides a deeper point. Sometimes people aren't selling products, they are selling perspectives. The real value wasn't the fish head. The real value was the shift in thinking. Many people never start businesses, not because they lack ability, but because they have already decided failure is inevitable. They say things like, "I'm not good with numbers. I don't have connections. Business isn't for people like me." Each of those sentences quietly closes a door. Successful entrepreneurs often start with a different sentence, not necessarily confidence, but curiosity. Instead of saying, "I can't," they say, "I haven't learned how yet." That small change creates space for action. One respected rabbi once explained this idea in a very direct way. A person rarely becomes poor because they lack money. They become poor because they believe their situation cannot change. That belief affects behavior. Behavior affects decisions, and decisions affect outcomes. Years ago, I heard a simple line that changed my thinking. It went like this: "You are not stuck where you are. You are stuck where you believe you belong." Once that belief changes, behavior changes too. You begin trying things you avoided before. You begin asking questions, you begin experimenting, and gradually the world starts revealing opportunities that were always there. You just couldn't see them before. Belief does not guarantee success, but lack of belief almost guarantees stagnation. In many traditional Jewish teachings, children grow up hearing a powerful idea. Even a single dollar can become a fortune if it is guided by knowledge, discipline, and patience. The lesson is not about the dollar, it is about possibility. And once someone begins to believe that growth is possible, another powerful skill begins to develop: the ability to see the world differently than the crowd. Which leads us to the second principle, one that has shaped some of the most creative entrepreneurs in history. Lesson 2. Think differently when everyone else thinks the same. Most people follow patterns. They study what others are doing. Then they try to repeat it. This feels safe. But in crowded markets, following the crowd often leads directly into competition. In many Jewish educational traditions, children are encouraged to ask questions constantly, not just what something means, but why it works that way. And most importantly, what happens if we think about it differently? When everyone asks, "How can we sell more?" someone else might ask, "How can we create something people want so much that selling becomes easy?" When everyone lowers prices, someone else asks, "What would make people happy to pay more?" When everyone chases trends, someone else asks, "What problem are people ignoring?" This habit of questioning assumptions has led to some remarkable innovations throughout history. And sometimes the results are surprisingly simple. One famous story tells of a wealthy businessman walking into a bank in New York. He looked successful, expensive suit, confident posture. Yet he approached the loan officer and requested something unusual. He asked to borrow $1. The staff assumed it was a joke, but he calmly placed documents on the desk showing assets worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. Everything checked out, so the bank approved the loan. $1. Before leaving, the bank manager asked the obvious question: why would someone with this much wealth borrow just $1? The businessman smiled. Because I needed a safe place to store my valuables while traveling. Renting a safety deposit box would cost much more. Borrowing $1 lets me keep them here almost free. The lesson isn't about tricks, it is about perspective. Sometimes the smartest solution appears when someone stops thinking like everyone else. Thinking differently does not mean being contrarian for the sake of attention. It means refusing to assume that the first answer is always the best answer. The world rewards people who ask better questions, and often the first step toward opportunity is simply this. Pause, look at the situation again, and ask, what is everyone else assuming right now? Because when you question assumptions, something interesting happens. You start noticing gaps, and inside those gaps, opportunities appear. But seeing opportunities is only the beginning. The next skill that separates ordinary thinking from strategic thinking is something even more powerful. Understanding the rules of the game, not to break them, but to use them wisely. And that is where our next lesson begins. Timeless business lessons, inspired by Jewish wisdom. Chapter 2. Understand the rules before you play the game. Most people believe success comes from working harder, work longer hours, push more effort, take more action, and effort absolutely matters. But there is another truth that experienced entrepreneurs quietly understand. Sometimes the difference between struggle and success is not effort. It is understanding the system you are operating inside. Imagine two people trying to cross the same river. One jumps in and swims as hard as possible. The other studies the current first. They notice where the water moves faster, where the rocks create shortcuts, where the current actually helps push them forward. Both people may be strong swimmers, but the one who understands the current will arrive first, and with far less effort. In business, the current is made of rules, regulations, taxes, pricing structures, market psychology, contracts, distribution systems. Most people ignore these things until they are forced to deal with them. But some of the most successful entrepreneurs study them early, because rules shape the game. And once you understand the rules, you begin to see possibilities that others miss. There is an old saying often repeated in Jewish teaching traditions. The foolish man fears the law. The average man obeys the law. The wise man studies the law. The difference between those three approaches can determine the direction of an entire career. Let me tell you a story, a real one often shared in business schools. Years ago, an importer wanted to bring thousands of high-quality leather gloves into the United States from Europe. Beautiful gloves, luxury quality. But when he reviewed the import regulations, he discovered something frustrating. The import tax on pairs of gloves was extremely high. If he brought them in as standard finished products, the profit would almost disappear. Most people would accept the situation and move on, or abandon the idea completely. But he decided to study the rules more carefully, not to break them, not to cheat, simply to understand them better than everyone else. After several days reading trade regulations, he noticed something interesting. The tax classification for individual gloves was different from the classification for pairs of gloves. The rules treated them as separate items, and the tax rate was significantly lower. So he did something clever. He shipped all the left gloves first, as individual items. They entered the country at a much lower tax rate. Later, he shipped the right gloves, also classified as individual items. Once both shipments arrived, the gloves were paired again, perfectly legal, perfectly compliant, and suddenly, the business became profitable. Now notice something important. This story is not about exploiting loopholes. It is about understanding the structure of a system. The importer did not falsify documents. He did not hide goods. He simply took the time to understand how the system worked. And that understanding gave him an advantage. Many entrepreneurs unknowingly operate at a disadvantage because they ignore the systems around them. Taxes, legal structures, partnership agreements, intellectual property rules, Distribution laws. These things may seem boring at first, but they shape the entire landscape of business. Ignoring them is like trying to play chess without knowing how the pieces move. In many Jewish communities, education traditionally places strong emphasis on debate and analysis. Students are encouraged to examine every detail of a text, ask questions, challenge interpretations, explore alternatives. This habit of deep examination trains the mind to notice patterns, and patterns often reveal opportunities. A young entrepreneur once asked an experienced mentor a simple question: "What is the biggest mistake new business owners make?" The mentor answered immediately: "They focus on products before they understand the system." Then he explained, "Two businesses can sell the exact same product, but the one that understands tax structure, logistics, partnerships, and distribution will grow faster, not because they are more talented, but because they are navigating the system intelligently." Think about modern examples. Ride-sharing companies did not invent cars. They understood transportation regulations. Streaming platforms did not invent movies. They understood digital distribution rights. Online marketplaces did not invent retail. They understood network effects and logistics. The pattern repeats again and again. People who succeed in complex industries often share one common skill. They study the game board before they start moving pieces. But understanding rules alone is not enough, because sometimes businesses struggle not because of external systems, but because of internal problems hidden inside the structure of the business itself. Which brings us to another powerful lesson, one that can save entrepreneurs years of frustration. Lesson 4. Fix the root, not the surface. Have you ever seen a struggling business attempt to reinvent itself over and over again? New logo, new marketing campaign, new colors, new slogan, new website. Yet nothing changes. Customers still don't return. Revenue still drops. And the owner eventually concludes that the market is too competitive. But often the real problem was never visible on the surface. In business, as in medicine, treating symptoms rarely solves the disease. You have to identify the root cause, and root causes are often hidden deeper than people expect. There is a humorous story sometimes shared by teachers explaining this concept. A farmer rushes to his neighbor in panic. "My chickens are dying." The neighbor thinks for a moment and suggests a solution. "Try feeding them wheat instead of corn." The farmer follows the advice. The next day, more chickens die, so he runs back again. "Now what should I do?" The neighbor says, "Maybe the water's too cold. Warm it up." The farmer tries again, but the chickens keep dying. Finally, almost the entire flock is gone. The farmer returns, exhausted. "I don't understand. None of your solutions worked." The neighbor sighs. "That's unfortunate. I had so many more ideas." The story is funny because it reflects a common mistake. Trying solution after solution without truly understanding the problem. In business, this happens constantly. A cafe loses customers. The owner assumes the problem is marketing, so they spend money on advertising. But what if the real issue is slow service, or inconsistent product quality, or poor customer experience? Advertising simply brings more people into the same broken system, which often makes the problem worse. Successful entrepreneurs approach problems differently. They ask diagnostic questions first. 3 questions in particular are extremely powerful. Question 1. What part of the system is already working well? Even struggling businesses usually have something valuable: a loyal customer base, a great product, a strong brand. Destroying those strengths by constantly reinventing the business can be dangerous. Question 2. Where exactly is the bottleneck? Every system has a point where flow slows down. In a restaurant, it might be the kitchen. In an online store, it might be fulfillment. In a software company, it might be product development. Fixing the bottleneck often unlocks growth without massive changes. Question 3. What evidence supports the diagnosis? Guessing is expensive. Data reveals truth. Customer feedback, sales numbers, retention rates. All of these clues help identify what is actually happening. In traditional Jewish teachings, there is a metaphor often used for complex systems: a watch. If the hands of a watch stop moving, you do not throw away the entire mechanism. You open the watch, you examine the gears, you look for the one gear that stopped turning. Once that gear moves again, the entire watch begins working. Businesses operate the same way. Sometimes a small adjustment in the right place can revive the entire system, while massive changes in the wrong place accomplish nothing. Many young entrepreneurs become discouraged too quickly. They believe failure means they chose the wrong path, but often the path was correct. Only the mechanism needed adjustment. Understanding systems, studying rules, diagnosing root causes, these skills transform the way people approach business. But there is another factor that quietly determines long-term success, and it appears in decisions so small that most people ignore them. Daily choices, tiny habits, small investments, which leads us to one of the most powerful ideas in long-term wealth creation. Lesson 5. Small choices shape large futures. People often imagine that success comes from one dramatic moment, a big break, a viral product, a lucky investment. But when historians study long-term success stories, they often discover something surprising. Most success is built through small decisions repeated consistently over time. There is an old teaching sometimes shared in Jewish households: you do not decide your entire destiny in a single day. You decide it in small choices made every day. Consider the difference between two habits: reading 10 pages of a book each day, or scrolling endlessly on your phone. The difference in a single day seems insignificant, but after a year, the person reading has finished dozens of books. Their knowledge expands, their thinking sharpens, their opportunities multiply. Compounding works not only in finance, but in knowledge, skill, reputation, health, and relationships. 1% improvement each day may seem trivial, but over time, it creates massive change. The same principle applies in reverse. Small neglect repeated daily leads slowly toward decline. Successful people rarely rely on motivation. Motivation fluctuates. Discipline creates consistency. Consistency creates results. In many traditional teachings about business and life, the emphasis is rarely on dramatic action. Instead, the focus is on steady progress, small improvements, reliable behavior, long-term thinking. Because when someone builds momentum through consistent choices, eventually the world begins to respond. Opportunities appear, connections strengthen, confidence grows, and what once seemed impossible begins to feel natural. But there is still one question left: if small decisions shape our future, what kind of relationship should we have with money itself? Is money simply a tool, a goal, or something more complex? That question leads us to the next principle, one that reveals something deeper than strategy. It reveals character. Timeless business lessons, inspired by Jewish wisdom. Chapter 3. Money is not just a number. It is a mirror lesson. 6. Money reveals character. For many people, money is a goal. For others, it is a tool. But in many traditional teachings about ethics and business, money is described in a very different way. Money is a mirror that reflects character, not perfectly, but often more honestly than people expect. There is an old story told in many variations. 3 travelers were preparing for a long journey during a religious holiday. During that time, they were not allowed to carry money, so they decided to leave their savings with a trusted neighbor until they returned. When the holiday ended, they came back to collect it, but the money was gone. No witnesses, no proof, and none of the 3 travelers admitted taking it. So they went to see a wise rabbi to settle the dispute. The rabbi listened quietly. Then instead of asking about the money, he began telling a story. He spoke about a young woman who was once engaged to be married, but later she realized she loved another man. Instead of lying, she spoke honestly and broke the engagement. The former fiancé did not react with anger. He wished her happiness and let her go peacefully. Sometime later, the woman was kidnapped by criminals. When the kidnappers heard her story about the honorable man she once knew, one of them was moved by the story and secretly helped her escape. The rabbi finished the story. Then he asked the three travelers a simple question. In that story, who is the most admirable person? The first traveler said, the fiancé. He showed kindness and dignity. The second traveler said, the woman. She was honest even when it was difficult. The third traveler laughed and said, the kidnapper was foolish. He should have demanded ransom money. The rabbi looked directly at the third traveler and calmly said, you are the one who took the money. The others were shocked. How could you possibly know? The rabbi replied gently, because when people reveal what they value most, they reveal themselves. The lesson is not about money itself. It is about perspective. Money does not change a person. It amplifies what was already inside them. Generosity becomes more visible. Greed becomes more obvious. Integrity becomes more meaningful. Many people assume that wealth automatically produces wisdom or virtue. History shows that this is rarely the case. Money simply magnifies existing habits. If someone is careless with small responsibilities, large wealth rarely fixes that problem. If someone values honesty and fairness when resources are limited, those values often remain when resources grow. In many Jewish ethical teachings, children are taught 3 questions about money. 3 questions that remain useful throughout life. First question: how am I earning this money? Is it honest? Does it create value? Does it improve someone's life? Second question: how am I using this money? Does it support meaningful goals? Does it reflect what truly matters? Or does it simply chase appearances? Third question: what kind of person will I become if I have much more of it? This question is rarely asked, but it may be the most important one. Because wealth is not just an economic force, it is a psychological force. It changes the choices available to a person, and those choices reveal priorities. Some people use wealth to build schools. Others use wealth to display status. Some invest in people. Others invest in attention. Both paths are possible, but they lead to very different legacies. There is another saying often repeated in business communities. People often ask how much someone earned, but wise people ask how much trust they kept while earning it. Trust cannot be purchased after it is lost, and reputation travels faster than money ever will. In the modern world, financial success often arrives with visibility, social media, public perception, brand identity. Yet behind every public image is a set of daily decisions: how employees are treated, how customers are respected, how agreements are honored. Those decisions quietly shape reputation over time. And reputation is one of the most valuable assets any entrepreneur can possess. Not because it appears on financial statements, but because it determines whether people are willing to work with you again. A single successful transaction is valuable. A lifetime of trusted partnerships is priceless. Understanding this relationship between money and character leads naturally to another important principle, one that may sound simple, but carries enormous power. Lesson 7. Respect small money. There is a short proverb sometimes quoted in traditional teachings: he who disrespects small coins will never protect large ones. At first glance, it sounds like advice about saving, but the deeper meaning is about attention and discipline. Many people dream about large wealth, large investments, large profits, but wealth rarely begins large. It usually begins small, very small. There is a story about a boy named Benjamin. One afternoon, he noticed a sign outside a house: Lawn mowing, $1. He knocked on the door. An elderly woman answered. He politely asked if the job was still available. She hesitated. It's only $1. Are you sure you want to do the work? The boy smiled. If I do the job well, the amount doesn't matter. He worked carefully, cut every corner evenly, cleaned the edges. When he returned home and told his father about the job, his father nodded with quiet pride. Then he said something the boy never forgot. You earned something more valuable than $1 today. You practiced respecting work. That lesson stayed with him. Years later, when Benjamin Franklin became a successful businessman and inventor, he often spoke about the importance of discipline in small matters, because habits built during small tasks often determine how people behave when the stakes grow larger. Entrepreneurs who ignore small expenses often struggle later. Minor costs accumulate. Small inefficiencies multiply. Carelessness spreads quietly through systems. On the other hand, entrepreneurs who respect details develop strong operational discipline. They monitor cash flow, track spending, evaluate decisions. This does not mean becoming obsessed with pennies. It means maintaining awareness. In many successful businesses, leaders remain surprisingly attentive to small numbers. They ask questions. Why did shipping costs increase this month? Why are return rates changing? Why did customer satisfaction drop by 2%? Those details reveal trends before problems become visible. Financial awareness is not about fear. It is about clarity. Clarity allows better decisions. Better decisions create stability, and stability creates freedom. Respecting small money also changes how people approach opportunity. Instead of waiting for a perfect investment or massive breakthrough, they begin building gradually. Small investments, small experiments, small improvements, each one adds momentum. Many successful entrepreneurs began with modest resources, a small service, a simple product, a side project. But because they respected the early stages, those beginnings grew into powerful foundations. And once someone begins respecting small opportunities, they often discover something else. Success rarely happens alone. Which brings us to another lesson, one about cooperation, one about partnerships, and one about looking beyond differences. Lesson 8. Collaborate without prejudice. In business, many people prefer to work with those who are familiar, people who think the same way, speak the same way, share the same background. This feels comfortable, but comfort is not always productive. Some of the most successful trading networks throughout history were built on partnerships between very different people, different languages, different cultures, different perspectives. But they shared one essential quality: mutual benefit. Many Jewish merchant communities throughout history operated across continents. They worked with partners in Europe, the Middle East, North Africa, and Asia, not because everyone was identical, but because cooperation created opportunities that isolation could never achieve. A merchant once traveled regularly to a market in the Middle East to purchase spices. At first, local traders viewed him with suspicion. He spoke differently. He dressed differently. He prayed differently. Yet instead of trying to imitate them, he did something more powerful. He listened. He asked questions. He learned how the spices were grown, how they were used in cooking, which varieties were most valued, which seasons produced the best harvest. Over time, the local merchants realized something. He was not there to compete with them. He was there to connect them with buyers in Europe. Soon he became the bridge between two markets. Everyone benefited. In business, value often emerges from complementary strengths. One partner understands technology, another understands marketing, another understands logistics. Together, they create something stronger than any individual could build alone. Successful collaboration requires two qualities: trust and clarity. Trust builds through consistent behavior. Clarity comes from clear agreements and shared expectations. When both exist, partnerships can grow for decades. And often the most powerful partnerships emerge from unexpected connections, a conversation, a meeting, a shared project. Which is why wise entrepreneurs remain open to relationships, even when those relationships begin small. Because just like money, just like opportunities, relationships also grow through attention, and sometimes the smallest connection can eventually open the largest door. Timeless Business Lessons, inspired by Jewish wisdom. Chapter 4. The Power of Small Money and Long-Term Thinking. There is a quiet habit that separates people who eventually build wealth from those who constantly feel like money slips through their hands. It is not luck, it is not intelligence, and it is not even income. It is how they treat small money. Many people dream about large fortunes, millions, investments, big deals. But the uncomfortable truth is this: most people who cannot manage small amounts of money will eventually struggle with large amounts too, because money does not change habits. Money simply magnifies them. There is an old story often told in many teaching traditions. A young student once saw an elderly man bend down slowly in the street to pick something up. Curious, the student asked, "What did you find?" The old man opened his hand. A single coin, just one. The student laughed gently. Why bother bending down for something so small? The old man smiled and answered calmly, "That is exactly why you are poor, and I am not." The point of the story is not about the value of the coin. The coin itself is almost meaningless. The real lesson is about respect. Respect for resources. Respect for discipline. Respect for accumulation. In many traditional teachings about finance, people are reminded of a powerful idea. There is no such thing as small money. There is only money that is respected, and money that is ignored, and money that is ignored tends to disappear. Think about how people often spend. A coffee here, a subscription there, a small purchase that feels harmless. Individually, these decisions seem insignificant, but over time they create patterns, and patterns shape financial outcomes. The interesting thing about wealth is that it rarely grows through dramatic moments. It grows through compounding. Small gains, repeated consistently for long periods of time. The same principle applies to habits. A person who saves $5 every day may not feel wealthy. But after years of consistency, something remarkable happens. Savings grow, investments grow, confidence grows, and eventually opportunities appear that would never have existed before. Many financial historians point out that one of the most powerful forces in economics is not income. It is time combined with discipline. When resources are respected and invested patiently, they multiply. When resources are ignored or spent impulsively, they vanish. This idea is deeply connected to another powerful principle: the compound effect. Imagine improving just 1% each day. 1% seems trivial, almost invisible, but over time the effect becomes extraordinary. After a year, consistent improvement produces results that are dozens of times stronger than where someone began. The reverse is also true. Neglect repeated daily gradually erodes progress, until one day people look around and wonder how they ended up so far from where they intended to be. This is why many successful entrepreneurs track small financial details carefully, not because they are obsessed with money, but because they understand what small details eventually become. A small leak can sink a ship. A small habit can build an empire. Some of the most disciplined business leaders still review basic expenses personally. They ask simple questions. Why did costs change this month? Why did margins shift slightly? Why did customer retention increase or decrease? These questions may seem minor, but they reveal the health of a business long before large problems appear. Respecting small money also changes the way people approach opportunity. Instead of waiting for a perfect moment or a massive investment, they begin building step by step. Small ideas, small experiments, small improvements. Each one adds knowledge. Each one reduces risk. Each one increases capability. Many globally successful companies began as modest experiments. A small online bookstore, a simple payment tool, a basic social platform. None of these began with the certainty that they would dominate entire industries. They began with curiosity and careful growth, and the people building them understood something important. Big results often grow from small, disciplined beginnings. But financial discipline alone does not guarantee success, because even careful people sometimes fall into a very common trap. A trap that destroys focus, destroys momentum, and quietly steals years from people's lives. The trap of distraction. Which brings us to another powerful lesson. Lesson 9. Stay focused on the right goal. There is a short story often used to explain how easily people lose focus. 3 hunting dogs once chased a squirrel into a hollow tree. The squirrel disappeared inside. The tree had only one exit, so the dogs waited patiently. They knew the squirrel had to come out eventually. Their eyes stayed fixed on the opening. Their attention never moved. Suddenly a rabbit ran past them, fast, unexpected, exciting. Without thinking, the dogs abandoned the tree and ran after the rabbit. They chased it across fields and hills. But rabbits are quick. Eventually, the rabbit disappeared, and when the dogs returned, the squirrel was gone. The story ends with a simple question. Do you still remember your squirrel? In business and life, the squirrel represents your core objective: financial independence, building a meaningful company, developing a valuable skill, creating something that lasts. But along the way, rabbits constantly appear. New trends, quick opportunities, shiny ideas, sudden promises of easy money, a new investment everyone is talking about, a new side project that seems exciting, a new strategy someone claims will work faster. Each rabbit looks tempting. Each one demands attention, and each one pulls people further away from their original goal. The modern world makes this problem even worse. Information moves at incredible speed. Every day new trends appear, new platforms, new business models, new opportunities. Some are valuable, many are distractions. Successful entrepreneurs develop a powerful skill. They learn to filter opportunities. They ask simple questions before changing direction. Does this move me closer to my main goal? Or does it simply feel exciting right now? Discipline is not only about working hard. It is about protecting attention, protecting time, protecting momentum. Many people do not fail because their ideas were bad. They fail because they abandoned the right idea too early. They dug a well halfway, then started digging somewhere else, then somewhere else again. Eventually they became exhausted, but never reached water. Focus multiplies progress. Every day spent moving in the same direction adds depth, adds expertise, adds credibility, adds relationships. These layers eventually produce breakthroughs that appear sudden from the outside, but were actually built slowly through consistency. One useful strategy is simple. Write down your most important objective. Place it somewhere visible. Then whenever a new opportunity appears, pause. Ask yourself one question. Does this help me catch the squirrel? If the answer is no, let the rabbit run. Because the people who build extraordinary results are rarely those who chase everything. They're the ones who pursue one meaningful path long enough for results to appear. Focus creates progress. Progress builds confidence. Confidence attracts opportunities, and opportunities open doors. But even when opportunities arrive, another skill becomes essential. A skill that determines whether deals succeed or collapse, whether partnerships grow or break apart, whether opportunities become long-term relationships. That skill is negotiation. And the most powerful negotiation strategy may not be what most people expect. Timeless business lessons, inspired by Jewish wisdom. Chapter 5. Negotiation is not about winning. It is about understanding. When most people hear the word negotiation, they imagine a battle. Two sides sitting across a table, each trying to win, each trying to take more, each trying to leave with the better deal. But experienced negotiators understand something deeper. The best negotiations rarely feel like battles. They feel like discoveries. Because the real goal is not to defeat the other side. The real goal is to understand what they truly need. There is a famous example often used in negotiation training. It is known as the orange story. Two children begin arguing over a single orange. Both insist they need it. Both refuse to give it up. The argument grows louder. Finally, an adult intervenes and proposes a solution. The orange is cut in half. Each child receives one half, problem solved, fair and equal, or so it seems. But later, something interesting happens. The first child throws away the peel and eats the fruit. The second child throws away the fruit and keeps the peel, because the peel was needed for baking a cake. The result? Half of the orange was wasted, not because the solution was unfair, but because nobody asked the most important question. What do you actually need? This small story reveals one of the most powerful ideas in negotiation. Equal is not always optimal. Understanding is. In many traditional Jewish teachings about trade and agreements, negotiation is described differently from the way modern culture often portrays it. Instead of focusing on victory, the emphasis is on clarity of interests. Each person at the table has priorities: money, timing, recognition, security, flexibility, growth. These priorities are rarely identical, and that difference creates opportunity. A skilled negotiator does not rush to propose terms. They begin by listening not only to words, but to motivations, because behind every request lies a reason, and behind every reason lies a deeper goal. Imagine a business partnership negotiation. One person demands a higher financial percentage, another demands more control over decisions. At first glance, it appears to be a conflict, but when the discussion deepens, something interesting emerges. One partner values creative freedom, the other values financial return. Suddenly, the negotiation changes. Creative control can be allocated one way, profit distribution another. Both sides achieve what matters most, and the partnership strengthens instead of collapsing. This approach transforms negotiation from confrontation into problem solving. Instead of dividing value, you begin creating value. Many successful business leaders follow a simple rule during negotiations. They spend roughly 80% of the time listening and only 20% speaking, because information is the most valuable resource at the table. Every insight into the other person's priorities reveals potential solutions. A wise negotiator also understands that people rarely negotiate purely with logic. Emotions play a role. Trust plays a role. Reputation plays a role. Sometimes a deal fails not because the numbers were wrong, but because the relationship was weak. In many traditional merchant communities throughout history, long-term trust was often valued even more than short-term profit. Why? Because business rarely ends with a single transaction. Relationships create future opportunities. One successful deal may lead to 10 more, but one broken agreement can close doors permanently. Consider the difference between two types of negotiators. The first negotiator tries to maximize every single deal, squeezing every possible advantage, winning aggressively, but eventually people stop trusting them, and opportunities slowly disappear. The second negotiator seeks balance. They protect their interests, but they also ensure the other side leaves the table satisfied, not cheated, not resentful, but respected. These negotiators build reputations, and reputations attract opportunities. This is why some of the most successful negotiators follow a principle that may sound unusual. They do not aim for equal outcomes. They aim for correct outcomes. Each side receives what matters most, even if the specific benefits look different. For example, one partner may prefer immediate payment, another may prefer long-term royalties, one may value public recognition, another may prefer anonymity. When negotiators understand these differences, agreements become easier, because the goal is no longer to divide a fixed pie. The goal becomes designing a better pie. There is another powerful question skilled negotiators often ask early in conversations. What matters most to you in this agreement? This question opens doors. It signals respect. It encourages honesty. And it often reveals priorities that numbers alone cannot show. The ability to ask thoughtful questions is often more valuable than presenting clever arguments. Arguments create resistance. Questions create reflection. Reflection creates collaboration. This approach requires patience. It requires humility. And sometimes it requires setting aside ego. But the long-term rewards can be extraordinary, because deals built on understanding tend to last longer. And long-lasting partnerships often become the foundation of great businesses. But negotiation skills alone cannot guarantee success, because even the best agreements depend on something deeper, something invisible, something fragile, and something incredibly powerful. Trust. Without trust, contracts become meaningless. Without trust, partnerships collapse. Without trust, even brilliant ideas fail, which is why the next lesson may be the most valuable of all. Lesson 10. Trust is the real currency of business. Money may power transactions, but trust powers relationships, and relationships power long-term success. Throughout history, communities that depended heavily on trade often placed enormous emphasis on reputation. A merchant known for honesty could build networks across continents. A merchant known for deception would quickly find doors closed, not by law, but by reputation. Trust functions like invisible infrastructure. It lowers friction. It speeds decisions. It reduces the need for excessive verification. When trust exists, deals happen faster. When trust disappears, every interaction becomes expensive and slow. Consider how many modern businesses rely on trust. Online marketplaces, digital payments, remote services. Most transactions now occur between people who may never meet face-to-face. Trust is what makes those systems possible, and trust grows through consistent behavior. Keeping promises, honoring agreements, communicating clearly, admitting mistakes when they occur. Each action strengthens reputation. Each broken promise weakens it. The fascinating thing about trust is that it compounds. Just like money, a trustworthy reputation attracts better partners. Better partners create better opportunities. Better opportunities produce better outcomes. Over time, this cycle becomes incredibly powerful. In contrast, people who repeatedly break trust face the opposite cycle. Opportunities shrink, partnerships weaken, growth becomes difficult. This is why some experienced entrepreneurs evaluate opportunities using a very simple question. Will this decision strengthen or weaken my reputation? If the answer is unclear, they proceed carefully. Because protecting trust often matters more than maximizing a single deal. Trust also influences leadership. Employees follow leaders they trust. Customers return to businesses they trust. Investors support entrepreneurs they trust. Trust turns transactions into relationships, and relationships turn businesses into communities. When trust exists, even difficult situations can be resolved, mistakes can be corrected, conflicts can be discussed. But when trust disappears, even small problems become disasters. This principle explains why many successful business cultures emphasize integrity so strongly, because integrity builds trust, and trust builds opportunity. Yet even with trust and negotiation skills, success still depends on something else, something more subtle. The ability to see potential where others see nothing, the ability to recognize value before the world notices it, which brings us to another fascinating lesson, a lesson about seeing opportunity in what others discard. Timeless business lessons, inspired by Jewish wisdom. Chapter 6, Turning Waste into Value. One of the most powerful skills in business is the ability to see value where others see none. Most people look at the world and divide things into two categories, useful and useless. But great entrepreneurs see something different. They see hidden value. History is full of examples of people who built fortunes not by creating something entirely new, but by recognizing potential in things that others ignored. Broken systems, unused resources, forgotten ideas, discarded materials, all of these can become opportunities in the hands of someone who knows how to look carefully. There is a story often shared in discussions about entrepreneurial thinking. In the late 20th century, the Statue of Liberty in New York underwent a major restoration. After decades of exposure to weather, parts of the structure needed replacement. Old metal, rusty materials, damaged internal components, large quantities of debris accumulated during the renovation. To most people, it looked like scrap, construction waste, material with no remaining value. But one entrepreneur saw something different. Instead of seeing garbage, he saw history. He purchased large quantities of the discarded materials, old copper fragments, pieces of wood, small sections of internal structure. Then he began transforming them. Tiny replicas of the Statue of Liberty, frames made from historical wood, souvenirs packaged with certificates explaining the origin of the materials, even small fragments labeled as pieces of American history. Tourists loved them, collectors loved them, museums bought them, and within months, what had been considered waste had become millions of dollars in sales. The lesson is not simply about creativity, it is about perspective. The entrepreneur did not invent the Statue of Liberty. He did not invent copper. He did not invent tourism. He simply saw value that others overlooked. This way of thinking appears frequently in entrepreneurial cultures, especially in communities where survival historically depended on adaptability. When resources are limited, people become skilled at recognizing hidden opportunities. They ask different questions. Instead of asking, "Is this valuable?" they ask, "How could this become valuable?" This shift in thinking changes everything, because value is often not fixed. Value can be created, reframed, repackaged, rediscovered. A failed business idea may become a powerful lesson for teaching others. Unused inventory can become a new product category. An abandoned building can become a vibrant marketplace. A forgotten skill can become a unique service. Many entrepreneurs eventually discover that failure itself can contain hidden assets, knowledge, experience, connections, insights, data. These resources often become the foundation for the next success. Some of the most successful founders in history experienced multiple failed ventures before building their most successful companies. But they did not discard the experience. They reused it, improved it, adapted it. Each failure contained pieces of knowledge that became valuable later. The same principle applies to everyday life. Ideas you once abandoned may become valuable later. Skills you learned years ago may suddenly become relevant again. Relationships you built in the past may open doors in unexpected ways. Nothing is ever completely wasted if you are willing to examine it again. This perspective requires curiosity. Instead of discarding something immediately, thoughtful entrepreneurs ask a few simple questions. What problem could this solve? Who might value this? How could this be improved? How could this be presented differently? Sometimes the answer appears immediately. Sometimes it takes time. But the habit of asking these questions gradually trains the mind to see opportunity everywhere. The world is full of resources, information, technology, ideas, materials. Most of them are ignored simply because people assume they have no value. But assumptions often hide opportunity. Entrepreneurs who develop the ability to recognize hidden value possess a powerful advantage. Because they do not depend entirely on luck, they create opportunity through observation. Yet even the ability to see opportunity is not enough, because opportunity also depends on people. customers, partners, employees, communities, and understanding people requires another essential skill, one that many leaders overlook, the skill of empathy, which leads to the next lesson. Lesson 11. Lead through understanding, not authority. Many people believe leadership means control, giving orders, making decisions, enforcing discipline. And in some situations, authority is necessary, but the most effective leaders understand something deeper. People rarely perform their best simply because they are told to. They perform their best when they believe in what they are doing. There is a simple story that illustrates this idea. Late one evening, a man returned home from work. He reached his door and realized he had forgotten his keys. Inside the house, his wife was asleep. He knocked. No response. He called her name. Still nothing. Finally, he tried something different. He gently spoke in the voice of their young child. "Mom, I'm scared." Within seconds, the door opened. His wife rushed to help. The situation resolved immediately, not because of force, but because the message reached the right emotion. Leadership often works the same way. People are not machines. They have motivations, fears, dreams, concerns. When leaders understand those motivations, they can guide behavior more effectively. Many traditional teaching methods emphasize storytelling instead of commands. Stories activate imagination. They help people see meaning. They help people understand why something matters. When people understand the purpose behind a task, they often become more motivated to complete it. In business environments, this approach appears in different ways. Leaders ask questions instead of giving instructions. They listen carefully to employees' concerns. They explain the purpose behind goals. They recognize effort. They create environments where people feel respected. When people feel valued, something remarkable happens. They begin contributing ideas. Energy increases. Responsibility becomes shared rather than enforced. The organization becomes stronger. Leadership built only on authority often produces obedience. But leadership built on understanding produces commitment, and commitment creates long-term performance. This is why many successful leaders spend time learning about the people they work with, what motivates them, what challenges they face, what ambitions they hold. Understanding these factors allows leaders to align personal goals with organizational goals. When that alignment happens, work becomes meaningful rather than mechanical. In many successful organizations, the most respected leaders are not the loudest voices in the room. They are often the most attentive listeners. They observe. They ask thoughtful questions. They encourage discussion. And when decisions are made, people support them because they feel included. Empathy does not mean weakness. It means awareness. And awareness allows leaders to make better decisions. Understanding people also improves negotiation, improves customer relationships, improves partnerships. Because business is ultimately a human activity, products matter, services matter. But relationships matter most. And relationships become even more important when conflicts appear, because conflicts are inevitable. Disagreements happen. Expectations differ. Pressures increase. What matters is how those conflicts are handled. Which brings us to another powerful lesson, one about solving problems without creating enemies. Timeless business lessons, inspired by Jewish wisdom. Chapter 7. Solve conflict by changing perspective. Conflict is unavoidable. Wherever people work together, differences will appear. Different expectations, different priorities, different interpretations of the same situation. Most people react to conflict in one of two ways. They either avoid it completely, or they attack it aggressively. Neither approach works very well. Avoiding conflict allows problems to grow quietly. Aggressive confrontation often damages relationships, but experienced leaders and negotiators understand a third option. Instead of escalating the conflict, they change the perspective of the situation. There is a small story that illustrates this beautifully. An elderly man lived in a quiet neighborhood. Every afternoon, 3 young boys came to the street outside his house and kicked an old trash can back and forth. Bang, crash, clang every single day. The noise drove him crazy. At first he considered yelling at them or calling their parents, but instead he tried something unexpected. One afternoon he walked outside and spoke to the boys. "You boys play this game every day?" They nodded. "Looks like fun." The boys looked surprised. Then the old man said something even stranger. "Tell you what, every time you come play here, I'll give each of you $10. The boys couldn't believe their luck. Free money for doing something they already enjoyed. So they returned the next day, and the next, and the next. Every afternoon, they kicked the trash can and received their payment. After about a week, the old man came outside again. He looked slightly embarrassed. "I'm sorry, boys. Times are tight. I can only pay $5 now." The boys looked disappointed, but $5 was still good money, so they kept playing. Another week passed. Then the old man spoke again. "I'm really struggling this month. I can only pay $2 now." The boys became angry. $2? That's not worth our time. And from that day forward, they never returned. The old man never raised his voice. He never argued. He simply changed the meaning of the activity. Before his intervention, the boys played for fun. After his intervention, the boys believed they were working for money. Once the money became small, the activity lost its appeal. The conflict disappeared. The lesson is subtle but powerful. Sometimes the most effective way to resolve conflict is not to fight behavior, but to change the motivation behind it. In business, many conflicts arise from misunderstanding. A customer may appear angry, but the real issue may be feeling ignored. An employee may appear unmotivated, but the real issue may be feeling undervalued. A partner may appear demanding, but the real issue may be fear of uncertainty. If leaders respond only to surface behavior, conflict escalates. But if they identify the underlying motivation, solutions become possible. One useful technique is simple. Instead of asking, "Who is right?" ask, "What is driving this reaction?" Understanding the emotional layer beneath a disagreement often reveals opportunities for resolution. This requires patience, it requires listening, and sometimes it requires setting aside the desire to prove a point. But the reward is enormous, because conflicts resolved through understanding often strengthen relationships rather than weaken them. Skilled negotiators and leaders use perspective shifts frequently. They change the environment. They change the framing of a problem. They change incentives. Each of these shifts can transform a disagreement into cooperation. For example, a tense meeting may become productive after moving the discussion to a casual setting. A rigid negotiation may become flexible once both sides understand each other's priorities. A frustrated team may become energized once the purpose behind their work becomes clearer. Perspective is powerful. It shapes how people interpret events. And when perspective changes, behavior often follows. This skill becomes especially valuable for leaders. Because leadership is not simply about directing tasks. It is about guiding people, helping them see possibilities they may not recognize yet, helping them align personal goals with shared goals. But even when conflict is resolved, another challenge remains, the challenge of maintaining focus, because modern life offers endless distractions, and distractions can quietly destroy progress, which leads us to the next lesson, one about protecting attention, protecting time, and protecting the vision that started everything. Lesson 12. Protect your focus. Imagine a craftsman building a house. Each day he lays bricks carefully. Slowly the walls rise. Progress is steady. Then, one day he notices another project nearby. It looks exciting, so he leaves his unfinished house and starts building something new. A few weeks later, another project catches his attention, so he moves again, then again, then again. Years pass, and he realizes something painful. He has worked constantly, but completed nothing. This happens surprisingly often in business. Entrepreneurs chase new opportunities before the previous ones mature. A new trend appears, a new platform becomes popular, a new strategy promises faster results. Each one looks promising. Each one demands attention, and gradually, focus disappears. Successful entrepreneurs learn to guard their attention carefully because attention is a limited resource. Where attention goes, progress follows. Where attention scatters, progress slows. One useful rule many professionals follow is simple. They choose a primary goal. Then they commit to pursuing that goal for a defined period of time. 3 months, 6 months, sometimes even years. During that time, they resist the temptation to constantly change direction. They refine, improve, adapt, but they remain focused. Focus allows learning. Learning creates mastery. Mastery creates results, and results create momentum. This does not mean ignoring new opportunities forever. It means evaluating them carefully. Before chasing something new, successful people often ask 3 questions. Does this opportunity align with my main goal? Will it accelerate progress or delay it? What will I have to abandon if I pursue it? These questions protect long-term progress from short-term excitement. Because excitement fades quickly, but meaningful achievement requires patience. Focus also builds credibility. When people see someone consistently pursuing a mission, trust grows. Customers trust. Partners trust. Investors trust. Consistency signals commitment, and commitment attracts support. In a world filled with constant information, protecting focus may be one of the most valuable skills anyone can develop, because the people who achieve extraordinary results are rarely the ones doing the most things. They are the ones doing the right things long enough. And once focus, trust, and understanding come together, something remarkable happens. Opportunities multiply, partnerships deepen, reputation grows, and success becomes sustainable rather than temporary. But before we conclude this journey, there are still 2 final lessons to explore. Lessons that connect everything we have discussed. Lessons about wisdom, legacy, and the deeper purpose behind wealth. Timeless business lessons, inspired by Jewish wisdom. Chapter 8. Wisdom is more valuable than wealth. If you ask most people what they want from life, the answer often sounds simple. More money, more freedom, more comfort. And there is nothing wrong with those desires. Money can create opportunities. It can provide security. It can allow people to care for their families and support meaningful causes. But throughout history, wise teachers have often reminded their students of something deeper. Money is powerful, but wisdom is more powerful, because money without wisdom disappears quickly. While wisdom often creates money again and again, there is a traditional saying often shared in Jewish teachings. A wise person can rebuild fortune many times, but a foolish person can lose it only once. The idea is simple. Wealth can be lost through bad investments, economic downturns, unexpected crises, but the ability to think clearly, to adapt, to learn, to create value again, that ability remains with the person who developed wisdom. History provides countless examples of this principle. Entrepreneurs who lost everything in economic crashes and rebuilt their businesses later. Investors who recovered from bankruptcy and eventually achieved success again. Inventors whose early failures eventually became breakthroughs. The difference was rarely luck, it was learning. Each experience sharpened their judgment. Each mistake revealed new information. Each challenge strengthened their decision-making. Over time, that accumulated knowledge became far more valuable than money itself. This is why many successful communities place enormous emphasis on education, not only formal education, but lifelong learning, reading,